I never expected to be the guy who needed to set a trap for the woman he loved. But sometimes, the truth is the only thing that can set you free. I met Celeste 3 years ago, and from the moment we locked eyes, it felt like fate had dropped her into my life. She had this effortless charm, the kind that drew people in without even trying. Confident, poised, and breathtakingly beautiful. She carried herself like she belonged to a world finer than most could dream of. And for a long time, I believed she loved me for who I was, not for what I had. I was raised by a father who built an empire with his own two hands. My dad, Richard Calloway, started as a small-time contractor and turned it into Calloway Developments, a real estate giant that defined skylines. But he didn't just hand my brother, Owen, and me the keys to the kingdom. He made us earn our way, dragging us to construction sites before we could even drive, teaching us the weight of responsibility, the cost of ambition. When I met Celeste, I had no reason to be suspicious. She was independent, smart, and seemed genuinely interested in me. I spoiled her because I wanted to, not because she demanded it. Weekend getaways, designer handbags, front row seats to anything she desired. I didn't mind. I thought love was about giving. But love, as I learned, isn't just about what you give. It's about what the other person values. When my father passed away 6 months ago, my entire world shifted. Losing him wasn't just losing a parent. It was losing my mentor, the man who taught me everything. While I was drowning in grief, trying to fill the void he left in the business and my heart, Celeste's focus shifted in a way I wasn't prepared for. Not once did she ask how I was holding up. Instead, her questions took a different shape. "So, how does the transition work now?" she asked 2 weeks after the funeral, twirling a spoon in her coffee absent-mindedly. "I mean, do you get full control, or is Owen in charge too?" At first, I answered without thinking much of it. "We both share leadership. It's what Dad always wanted." She nodded, but something about her expression stayed with me. The more time passed, the more pointed her questions became. "How much equity do you have now? Do you make the final decisions, or does Owen have a bigger say? What happens if the board wants a change in leadership?" Every night after work, I came home drained, struggling to balance my grief with the enormous responsibility I had inherited, and every night, Celeste pounced. It became relentless. At first, I wanted to believe it was her way of showing concern. Maybe she was just trying to understand my world. But deep down, something gnawed at me. She wasn't asking how I was coping. She wasn't even mentioning my father unless it was in the context of the business. It became more obvious in the way she talked about the company to our friends. "Calloway Developments is expanding in 3 new cities," she would say with a proud smile, as if she were part of the board. She started mentioning Owen more too, slipping his name into conversations in ways that didn't sit right with me. "Owen's so sharp when it comes to strategy," she remarked one evening at dinner with some of our business partners. "He's got that natural instinct for leadership." Something about the way she said it made my stomach turn. Then came the real shift. She started showing up at business meetings, ones she had no reason to be at. "I just want to understand the inner workings," she said sweetly. "If I'm going to support you, I should at least be informed." She wasn't just acting like a fiancée. She was acting like a shareholder. One night, as we sat on the couch, she asked a question that sent an icy jolt through me. "So, if something happened and you weren't in charge of the company anymore, what would you do?" She said it so casually, like it was just a random thought. But I knew better. The moment hung between us, heavy and unspoken. She wasn't asking out of curiosity. She was testing the waters. From that night on, I started paying closer attention. The way she studied the power dynamics between Owen and me, the way she inserted herself into conversations with our investors, the way she seemed almost hopeful when I mentioned any challenges I faced in the company. She wasn't acting like a woman in love. She was acting like someone strategizing her next move. And suddenly, it hit me. Celeste didn't just love me. She loved the empire my father built. And if she thought I wasn't holding the reins firmly enough, she was already looking at her next option. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I wasn't the one running Calloway Developments, she'd be ready to shift her loyalties to someone who was. And that's when I knew. It was time to test her, to find out just how deep her loyalty really ran. And if my gut was right, She was about to fail spectacularly. I didn't act right away. Instead, I let the suspicion fester, testing the waters with small, calculated moves. The last thing I wanted was to be wrong about Celeste, to let paranoia destroy something real. But then, she proved me right. It started subtly. She became more interested in Owen's role in the company, even more than mine. She'd ask about his decisions, his strategies, his work ethic. At first, I thought she was just being polite, trying to understand the family business. But then her comments became more pointed. "Owen's really good at this, huh?" she mused one night over dinner. "I mean, not that you're not, but he's just got this natural way of commanding a room." I watched her carefully, my stomach tightening. "Yeah," I said, keeping my voice even. "We balance each other out." She nodded, but I caught the flicker of something behind her eyes, something calculating. And then, she started positioning herself closer to Owen. At first, it was little things, showing up at company events when she never had before, making conversation with him in a way that felt different. She started texting him, at first casually, asking about meetings, about projects, about how he was handling the pressure. Then, she crossed the line. One night, Owen texted me a screenshot. "Celeste, I admire how you handle things. You're so decisive, so confident. It's inspiring." I stared at the message, my pulse slow and deliberate. "She's testing me," Owen texted. "I'm guessing this isn't just friendly?" "No," I replied. "Not even close." But I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. Instead, I decided to push things further, to see just how deep she'd go. The next evening, I came home from work, my expression weary and frustrated. Celeste greeted me at the door, dressed to perfection, her makeup flawless. "Long day?" she asked sweetly, wrapping her arms around my neck. I forced a sigh, rubbing my forehead. "Yeah, things are complicated at work." She pulled back slightly, her eyes narrowing. "What do you mean?" I hesitated, letting the moment build. "There's talk of restructuring. The board is considering shifting leadership roles." She blinked. "Wait, what?" I swallowed hard, pretending to be reluctant. "It's not set in stone, but I might not be the one leading Callaway developments for much longer." I watched her reaction carefully. Her grip on my shirt tightened just slightly. Her face was neutral, but I knew her well enough to see the flicker of unease in her eyes. She forced a laugh. "That's ridiculous. You're Richard Callaway's son. This company is yours." I gave her a small, tired smile. "That's the thing, turns out, I'm not. At least, not by blood." Her entire body went rigid. I let the silence stretch, then sighed dramatically. "Dad adopted me when I was a baby. I just found out recently. And because of that, most of the inheritance is going to Owen." She stared at me, her lips slightly parted, and for the first time, I saw something shift, a crack in her composure. You're serious?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah." I expected her to immediately reassure me, to tell me it didn't matter, that she loved me for me. But instead, she sat back, staring into the distance, her fingers tapping against her wine glass. Processing, calculating. And then she said the words that sealed her fate. "So, if Owen is in charge now, what does that mean for us?" I felt my chest tighten, but I kept my expression calm. "It means things are going to be different. I'll still be involved, but I won't be the one making the big decisions anymore." She exhaled slowly, twirling her wine glass between her fingers. "I mean, we've always talked about our future, about building a life together. Does this change our plans?" There it was. The shift. I leaned back, feigning exhaustion. "I don't know. I just need to figure things out." She reached for my hand then, squeezing it gently. "Of course. I support you, no matter what." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. That night, she was restless. She tossed and turned in bed beside me, her mind spinning. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, could feel the weight of her unspoken thoughts. And the next morning, she made her move. Owen called me while I was still in bed, his voice low and unreadable. "She just texted me," he said. "She wants to meet up. Alone." I closed my eyes and exhaled. Game on. Owen played his part perfectly. He kept his responses short, neutral, giving Celeste just enough to feel comfortable. Celeste, hey, I was wondering if we could grab coffee sometime. Just the two of us? Owen, sure. Everything okay? Celeste, yeah, just a lot on my mind. I'd love to talk. She was careful, but I knew what she was doing. She wasn't going to make a direct move, not yet. She was testing the waters, seeing how open Owen was to the idea of her getting closer. Owen and I set a plan. He agreed to meet her at a cafe downtown, a place just private enough that she'd feel comfortable talking, but public enough that she wouldn't think she was walking into a trap. I'd be nearby, watching from a distance, listening in on my phone. The day of the meeting, Celeste dressed for the occasion. Not business casual, not date night ready, but something in between. Elegant, approachable, but still effortlessly seductive. She knew exactly what she was doing. I sat in my car across the street, my headphones in, listening to their conversation unfold. She started slow, casual, asking about the company, about how Owen was handling the pressure, about what his vision for the future looked like. She played the supportive friend, the concerned confidant. And then, she took a risk. You know, she said, stirring her coffee with deliberate slowness, I've always admired you, even before all of this. You have this way of commanding respect. You don't have to fight for attention. People just listen when you speak. Owen, to his credit, didn't flinch. Thanks, he said, his voice unreadable. Celeste smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I don't mean to compare, but I think you and Max are really different when it comes to leadership. There it was. The first real test. How so? Owen asked, leaning back. She hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. I love Max. I do. But he's always been more comfortable following his father's footsteps. He's never really had to prove himself the way you have. And now, with this whole shift in power, I just wonder if he's really ready for that kind of change. I clenched my jaw. She wasn't just testing Owen's interest in her. She was trying to plant seeds of doubt, to make him question my ability to lead. Max is smart, Owen said evenly. He'll figure it out. Celeste smiled. Of course. I worry about him, you know? She sighed, resting her chin on her hand. Lately, he's been so distant, so different. I feel like I don't even know where we stand anymore. I could hear the carefully placed vulnerability in her voice, the calculated softness. She wanted Owen to see her as someone lost, someone looking for guidance, someone he could save. I know he's going through a lot, she continued, but sometimes I wonder if he even sees a future with me anymore. Owen didn't say anything. He let the silence stretch, giving her the space to fill it. And she did. Her voice dropped just slightly, her tone more intimate. Do you ever think about the future, Owen? About what you really want? I gripped the steering wheel, my pulse steady. This was it. She was taking the bait. Owen exhaled. I don't know, he said. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about loyalty. About the people I can actually trust. Celeste tilted her head, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. Trust is important, she murmured. She was walking into the fire, and she didn't even realize it. Owen leaned forward slightly. Celeste, can I ask you something? She met his gaze. Of course. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. If Max wasn't in the picture, where would you see yourself? There was a brief flicker in her expression, a split-second hesitation, and then she smiled. Honestly, she said, voice soft, I'd want to be with someone who truly sees me, someone driven, someone who isn't afraid to take what they deserve. Owen nodded. And you think that's me? Celeste let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. You're different, Owen. You know that. She wasn't saying it outright. Not yet. But she was setting the stage. And I had everything I needed. I tapped out a message to Owen. Me, that's enough. Wrap it up. Owen checked his phone, then sat back with an easy smile. Well, he said, finishing his coffee, I guess we'll see what the future holds. Celeste beamed. Yeah, I guess we will. She thought she had him. She thought she had secured a backup plan. She had no idea how wrong she was. That night, I watched her as she curled up beside me on the couch, acting as if nothing had changed. She kissed me goodnight, whispered how much she loved me, and drifted off to sleep. But I didn't sleep, because I knew exactly what I had to do next. And when I was done, Celeste was going to wish she had never played this game. The next morning, I watched Celeste move around our apartment with an ease that made my skin crawl. She was humming softly as she made her coffee, scrolling through her phone as if nothing had changed. But everything had. I had proof now, concrete, undeniable proof that she was positioning herself for something bigger, something more lucrative. That she wasn't with me for me, but for what I could offer. And if I wasn't the one holding the power, she was more than willing to pivot toward Owen. The question was, how far would she go? I wanted to see if she would take that final step. If she would push Owen into a position where there was no mistaking her intentions. And so, I decided to push her first. I let 2 days pass without saying a word about her meeting with Owen. I acted normal. Maybe a little more distant, just enough for her to notice, to make her wonder. And it worked. By the third night, she was restless. "You've been quiet lately," she murmured as we lay in bed. "Is everything okay?" I hesitated, then sighed heavily. "Yeah, just thinking." She turned toward me, her fingers lightly tracing my arm. "About what?" I let the silence stretch, then finally said, "About the future." Her hands stilled. I could feel the way her body tensed beside me, even as she tried to keep her voice light. "Our future?" I nodded. "I don't know what's going to happen with the company. If Owen really takes over completely, things are going to be different. I'm just trying to figure out where I fit in all of this." She was quiet for a moment. Then, she slowly pulled back. "Max, you know I support you, right?" I turned my head to look at her. "Do you?" Her lips parted slightly, as if she didn't expect me to question it. "Of course I do," she said, forcing a small smile. "I love you." I didn't respond. I just let the words hang between us, thick with unspoken truths. She shifted then, turning onto her back, staring up at the ceiling. And in that moment, I knew. She wasn't thinking about us. She was thinking about herself. That night, she didn't reach for me like she usually did. She fell asleep with a small crease between her brows, lost in thought. And the next day, she made her move. Owen called me that afternoon, his voice laced with something that sounded like disbelief. She invited me to dinner. I gripped my phone tighter. "What?" "She said she wanted to talk about the company," he continued. "That she has some ideas about how things should move forward." I let out a slow breath. "And she invited just you?" "Just me." I leaned back in my chair, exhaling. "This is it." Owen hesitated. "Are you sure you want to do this? I mean, we already know where she stands." "I need to hear her say it," I said firmly. "I need to hear exactly what she's planning." Owen was silent for a moment, then sighed. "All right, let's do this." We set the plan in motion. The dinner was at an upscale restaurant, one Celeste and I had been to plenty of times before. It was intimate, private, the kind of place where she wouldn't feel the need to hold back. What she didn't know was that I would be there too. I arrived 30 minutes before their reservation, taking a seat in a secluded corner of the restaurant. From my vantage point, I had a perfect view of their table, just out of her line of sight. Owen arrived first, and Celeste walked in a few minutes later. She had dressed for him. Her makeup was soft, natural, but intentional. Her dress was sleek, elegant, subtly revealing. And the moment she sat down, she leaned in slightly, flashing a smile that wasn't just friendly. I felt my stomach tighten. I pressed record on my phone. The conversation started simple, harmless. She asked about his workload, about his vision for the company. But then, slowly, carefully, she began to steer the conversation toward me. "I worry about Max sometimes," she said, swirling her wine glass. "He's always had so much to live up to, you know? His father's legacy. It's a lot of pressure." Owen nodded, playing along. Celeste sighed, shaking her head. "And now, with everything changing, I just don't know if he's ready for that kind of transition." Owen tilted his head. "You don't think so?" She hesitated, then gave a small, apologetic smile. "I just think some people are natural leaders, and some aren't." I clenched my jaw. And then, She did it. She reached across the table, lightly placing her hand over Owen's. I've always admired you, Owen, she said softly. You have this presence. People respect you, follow you. That's rare. Owen didn't move his hand. He let her linger, just long enough for me to get the full recording. Celeste exhaled, glancing down briefly before meeting his eyes again. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I want to be with someone who knows where they're going, who knows what they want. There it was, clear as day. I had everything I needed. I stood up slowly, adjusting my jacket, my heartbeat steady, and then I walked toward their table. Celeste didn't notice me at first. She was still focused on Owen, waiting for his reaction. Then, she caught the movement from the corner of her eye. She turned, and her entire face went pale. Max. I slid into the seat beside Owen, placing my phone on the table, the screen still glowing with the active recording. I leaned forward, my voice calm. Please, I said. Continue. Celeste's mouth opened and closed, her breath coming out in a short, sharp exhale. Owen leaned back, crossing his arms. Yeah, Celeste, he said, tilting his head. Tell me more about what you really want. She swallowed hard, her fingers gripping the napkin in her lap. I don't know what you think you heard, but... I clicked the playback button. Her own voice filled the space between us, playing back every single word she had just said. I watched her face shift from shock to horror to something desperate. This isn't, she started, her voice trembling. I stared at her, my expression unreadable. Don't, I said. Don't insult me by lying again. She sucked in a shaky breath, her eyes darting between me and Owen. Max, please, she whispered. I didn't mean. I leaned back, my lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. Check, please, I said to the waiter passing by. Celeste reached for my hand, but I pulled away. She knew. She knew it was over. And for the first time since this all started, I felt free. Celeste followed me out of the restaurant, her heels clicking against the pavement as she rushed to catch up. Max, wait, she pleaded, grabbing my arm. I stopped but didn't turn to face her. The air between us was thick, heavy with the weight of everything she had just said, everything I had just exposed. I can explain, she said breathlessly, eyes wide and desperate. I finally turned, my expression unreadable. Go ahead. She hesitated, licking her lips, trying to string together a defense. I was just scared, she started, her voice trembling. Everything was changing so fast. I didn't know where we stood anymore, and I panicked. Panicked? I echoed, my tone deadly calm. That's what you call it? Her eyes shimmered under the streetlights. I love you, Max. I swear I do. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. No, you don't, Celeste. You love what I have. You love the idea of what I can give you. And when you thought that wasn't enough, you went looking for your next best option. Her lower lip trembled. That's not true. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the recording. I pressed play. Her voice, clear as day. I want to be with someone who knows where they're going, who knows what they want. Celeste's entire body tensed. I let the words hang between us before I locked my phone and slipped it back into my pocket. You made your choice, I said simply. Now you can live with it. I turned to walk away, but she grabbed my arm again, this time harder. Max, please, she whispered. Don't do this. I pulled my arm free. You already did. And with that, I walked away. She didn't follow me. For a few days, there was silence. No texts, no calls, no desperate messages begging for forgiveness. And then, just when I thought she had finally accepted the consequences of her actions, she played her final card. It was late, nearly midnight, when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, and for the first time in days, I saw her name. Celeste. I stared at it for a moment, debating whether to ignore it, but something in my gut told me to check. I opened the message. Celeste, we need to talk. It's important. I didn't reply. Less than a minute later, another message came through. Celeste, I'm pregnant. I froze. The world around me felt like it had been stripped of sound, like everything had narrowed to just those two words. I reread them, waiting for something inside me to shift, to feel panic or disbelief, or even the smallest flicker of concern. But I felt nothing, because I knew Celeste, and I knew a desperate lie when I saw one. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the message to Owen. A few minutes later, my phone rang. "Are you serious?" Owen's voice was laced with disbelief. "You think she's lying?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He let out a sharp laugh. "Max, she barely even touched you in the last month. And now she's suddenly pregnant?" I exhaled, rubbing my jaw. I don't even know what her plan is. Does she really think this will fix anything? "She thinks it'll trap you," Owen said flatly. "She's counting on you panicking, on you being too scared to question it." I clenched my jaw. Then she really doesn't know me at all. I blocked her number. But Celeste wasn't done. The next morning, my mother called me. "Max," she said, her voice hesitant, "Celeste just called me." I shut my eyes, already knowing where this was going. "She said she's pregnant," Mom continued carefully, "and that she doesn't know what to do." I let out a slow breath, trying to keep my temper in check. "Mom, she's lying." There was a pause. "Are you sure?" "Yes." Another pause. "She seemed really upset," Mom admitted, crying, saying she didn't want to go through this alone. I pinched the bridge of my nose. "She's manipulating you." Mom sighed. "I had a feeling, but I needed to hear it from you." I knew what Celeste was doing. She was trying to control the narrative, trying to paint herself as the victim before I could tell people the truth. So I decided to beat her to it. I reached out to a doctor, one I trusted, one who worked with our family. Then, I sent Celeste a message. "Me, if you're telling the truth, then we'll go to the doctor together. I'll pay for everything. We'll get a paternity test." It took less than a minute for her to respond. "Celeste, I can't believe you don't trust me." I stared at the message, then typed back one final response. "Me, you just answered my question." And then, I blocked her. For good. In the weeks that followed, Celeste's world collapsed. Her parents found out everything about how she had tried to manipulate me, how she had positioned herself for Owen, how she had faked a pregnancy as her last desperate attempt to hold on. They cut her off. She lost the apartment I had been paying for, the car I had leased in her name. The friends who had once fawned over her when she was on my arm distanced themselves as soon as they realized there was nothing left to gain. She tried reaching out a few more times, through mutual friends, through fake accounts, but I never responded. I didn't need to, because Celeste had finally exposed herself, and she had no one left to lie to. For the first time in months, my life was quiet. No manipulation, no mind games, no watching my back, waiting for the next move. Just peace. And if there's one thing I learned from all of this, it's that sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying someone. It's letting them destroy themselves. For weeks after I cut Celeste off, I waited for the inevitable, the final desperate move, the last-ditch effort to claw her way back into my life. But it never came. Instead, silence stretched between us like a canyon. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't even realized I was missing. Relief. Celeste had spent years weaving herself into my world, crafting an image of the perfect partner, the devoted fiancé. And now, that image had shattered. I had watched her go from a woman I thought I'd marry to someone I barely recognized. A person willing to manipulate, scheme, and betray without a second thought. And once the game was over, she had nothing left to play. I had one. But the funny thing about winning? It doesn't always feel the way you think it will. A few weeks later, Owen and I were grabbing drinks at a rooftop bar. The city sprawled out beneath us. It was the first time in a long time that we weren't talking about the company, or Celeste, or anything that felt heavy. It was just two brothers, catching up. "She texted me," Owen said after a while, setting his glass down. I raised an eyebrow. "Celeste?" He nodded. "About a week ago. It wasn't anything dramatic. Just, I'm sorry. I messed up." I exhaled. "Did you respond?" "Nope." He shook his head. "Didn't see the point." I took a slow sip of my drink, letting that settle. "Think she actually regrets it?" Owen was quiet for a moment. Then he shrugged. "I think she regrets losing what she had." I nodded. because I knew he was right. Celeste didn't regret betraying me. She regretted getting caught. But it didn't matter anymore, because I wasn't looking back. A month passed. Then two. I threw myself into work, into rebuilding, into rediscovering the parts of my life that had nothing to do with Celeste. And I was good. Better than I had been in a long time. Then, one afternoon, my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't expected. Daniel Taylor. Celeste's ex. We had only met once, at some charity event years ago. He had been polite, distant. A guy who didn't seem to hold any grudges, despite the fact that I had been the one Celeste chose after him. I stared at his name for a second before answering. Max, his voice was even, calm. Hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. I leaned back in my chair. No, you're good. What's up? A pause. Then, I figured you'd want to know. Celeste reached out to me. That got my attention. I sat up, my grip tightening on the phone. When? Couple weeks ago. Said she wanted to meet up, talk about some things. He let out a short laugh. Took me a while to realize she was feeling me out. I frowned. Feeling you out for what? She didn't come right out and say it, but I got the sense she was testing if there was still something between us. If she could slip back into my life now that she's burned every bridge in hers. I exhaled. Jesus. She's got nowhere else to go, Daniel said simply. Figured she'd try her luck with me again. I leaned forward, pressing my fingers against my temple. And I shut it down, he said. Told her I wasn't interested. But I thought you'd want to know. I was silent for a moment. Then, I let out a dry chuckle. She really doesn't stop, does she? Nope, Daniel said. But she's running out of options. A beat of silence passed between us. Then, he sighed. I know we don't know each other, but for what it's worth, you dodged a bullet. I smirked. Yeah, I figured that out the hard way. Good, he said. Take care, Max. You too. I hung up, tossing my phone onto the desk. Celeste was still playing the game, still looking for a way back into the world she had lost. But she wasn't my problem anymore. The last time I heard anything about Celeste, it was through mutual friends. She had moved out of the city, crashing with a cousin who barely tolerated her. She was bouncing between jobs, struggling to keep up with the kind of lifestyle she had once been so comfortable in. Apparently, she had tried to reconnect with a few other guys from her past. None of them took the bait. She had burned too many bridges, played too many angles. And now, she was exactly where she had been trying to avoid. Alone. And as for me, I was finally free. Life moved forward. Owen and I ran the company the way our father had taught us. I reconnected with old friends, built a life that felt real again. And one day, months later, I met someone new. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't calculating. She didn't care about what I had. She cared about me. And when I looked into her eyes, I realized something. The best revenge isn't proving someone wrong. It's finding happiness despite them. And I had. Finally. Time has a way of putting things into perspective. When you're in the middle of something, betrayal, heartbreak, anger, it feels all-consuming, like you'll never get past it. But eventually, you do. Months turned into a year, and Celeste became nothing more than a ghost of my past. A cautionary tale I kept tucked away. A reminder of how easily someone's mask can slip when power and money are on the table. The last bit of closure came unexpectedly. It was a warm evening, and I had just finished a long day at the office when I got a message from Owen. Owen, you're gonna want to see this. I frowned and clicked on the link he sent. It was a social media post, one that had started gaining traction in certain circles. It was from someone I didn't recognize, but the content stopped me cold. A long, emotional rant from a guy claiming he had just been played by a woman he thought was the one. And there, halfway through the post, was her name. Celeste. I read through it quickly, my smirk growing wider with each paragraph. Apparently, she had tried the same tactics, charming, manipulating, angling herself into the life of a new target. Only this time, the guy wised up before she could do any real damage. And instead of walking away quietly, he aired everything out for the world to see. She had finally hit a wall. Her tactics were no longer working. The reputation she had carefully curated was unraveling. Owen texted again. Owen, Looks like karma finally caught up to her. I chuckled, shaking my head. Me, took long enough. And then, just like that, I put my phone down and forgot about her. Because I had better things to focus on. Life had shifted in ways I never could have predicted. The company was thriving, but I had finally found balance, something I never had when I was with Celeste. I wasn't drowning in work, wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for someone to betray me. I had control of my life again. And more importantly, I had found real happiness. It started out simple, a chance meeting at a coffee shop with someone who had no idea who I was. She didn't ask about my company, didn't care about my last name or my net worth. She just laughed at my bad jokes, rolled her eyes when I tried too hard to impress her, and made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. For the first time, I was with someone who didn't want anything from me, except me. And that was worth more than anything money could buy. One evening, we were sitting on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker below us, when she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You ever think about what your life would have been like if things had gone differently?" she asked. I thought about Celeste, about the lies, the betrayal, the months I had wasted trying to hold on to something that was never real. And then, I thought about where I was now. Smiling, I reached for her hand. "No," I said simply, "because I ended up exactly where I was meant to be." She squeezed my hand, her smile warm and genuine. And for the first time in a long, long time, I meant every single word.